Well, it's great to be with y'all. It's crazy. I was supposed to come in last night through Atlanta into Jacksonville, but we were about to land in Atlanta, and I would have had an hour connection, but then thunderstorms, and we kept circling, and we ended up landing in Charlotte, which is a huge blessing, because if we landed in Atlanta, I wouldn't have caught my flight, and the earliest I would have been able to be here is 2 p.m. Whereas by landing in Charlotte, being an American hub, there's so many flights to get here this morning. So thank you, Jesus, that as man makes his plans, but the Lord determines his steps. Definitely the case. All right, okay, so today we're gonna be talking about discipleship. What I'd love to do is, I know the guitar's in the way. Yeah, perfect, thank you. I would love to just give you a sense of where we're going and give you a framework. Because when we talk about discipleship, it's the same word. Some people call it spiritual formation. And when we say discipleship, everyone means something different. So when we talk about the idea of creating a discipleship pathway and talking about discipleship, I just want to make sure that we're all on the same page. So this is a simple diagram, thank you, just to help you get a sense of what we're talking about. And if you were here in February when Mac Lake was here, he's a friend and I love his material. He talks a lot around leadership and a leadership pipeline. And I want to give you the difference and how discipleship and leadership intersect with each other in the local church. All right. So if just in a very simple diagram, if vision is where we're going, and where God is calling you and your church to go. And at Beulah in Edmonton, where I serve as a lead pastor, our vision is to awaken greater Edmonton to King Jesus. Our vision isn't to fill our doors, and yeah, we have all the different metrics and all that stuff, but our vision is much broader than that. If you're familiar with the work of Simon Sinek, the why guy, I guess. He wrote this other book called The Infinite Game. And when I became the lead pastor at Beulah about 4 years ago, that was a book that I was processing to just try to think outside the box around vision and this idea of, okay, what does it look like to have a vision that is truly inspiring, not only at the organizational level, but at an individual level. Right? So if that's what the vision is, right, where you're inspiring people, not only organizationally, our previous vision that I had inherited was reaching 1% of greater Edmonton for Christ. And while that is a great vision, what we learned was it was very inspiring to our organizational leaders, but not to our church. Because to our church, they were like, so our vision's just to get bigger? I don't really want to get bigger. I want, it's going to mean less parking spots and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Whereas, we're so consumeristic. Whereas this idea of, okay, we're still going in the same direction, but if our vision is to awaken greater Edmonton to King Jesus, it still has that same vibe, but it's more, it's beyond the organization, right? And it's cool to see how individuals have been able to find their part in it. But if this is where we're going, then I love this idea of DNA. Oh, I was a little bit off here on my drawing. Whoop. But if you think about DNA being a double helix, and if you know much about how DNA works and all the ways that the different molecules actually, they're apart and they mirror one another all the way up the strand, then in your church, the discipleship pathway is one side of that DNA strand, and your leadership pipeline is the other side. And there are going to be moments in what we talk about today and in the way that you build out your discipleship pathway and all of the systems that are around that. There are going to be moments where there's intersection. And you're like, isn't that sort of what we do in our leadership side of things and how we develop people? And yeah, that makes sense because there's intersection points all the way up where it'll feel like the same thing, but it is a different pathway. And we do need to think about discipleship differently than leadership. And I'll just give you one reason why. Leadership is very skills-based. Leadership is, I don't know how to parallel park, just for example, and now I know how to parallel park. And yeah, you may be better at parallel parking than someone else, but we both know how to parallel park. Okay? When it comes to discipleship and the fruit, I can say, okay, I'm gentle and you are gentle, but are we ever gentle like Jesus, fully? Or humble? Like, you know what I'm talking about? Like in the fruit of the Spirit. So it's hard to objectively say, and you would never say, I am done discipleship. Whereas when it comes to leadership, you can say, I'm competent in this area of leadership and I'm done. Like, I don't need to review, I don't need to keep on working this. But when it comes to discipleship, it's different, right? So that's why it is a different, because if you see them as the same thing, and there are some folks that do see them as the same thing, the problem with seeing them as the same thing and the same process is you will begin assuming on one what you ought not to assume on it, right? Because you never complete discipleship. On this side of eternity, we're not complete. But when it comes to leadership, well, you can't be doing the same things over and over. Like if you've ever come into a church and taken over a ministry and redesigned what was already there because, maybe you wanted to update it, then you've probably come across volunteers and leaders who are like, son, I'm older than I'm older than you, and I've been around the block so many times, I don't need to do your training. Right? You know what I'm talking about? You ever meet people like this? Right? And yes, it can sound consumeristic, but there is a sense where they have sort of done the same thing over and over and over again. And every time a new pastor comes in, they think that they have got it right, the other person got it wrong, and you really do need to do it over again. And they're just sick and tired of doing the same thing over and over again because it's leadership. And they're like, but I know how to lead a group. Right? I already know how to do that. Do I need to do it again? And then we conflate it with being a discipleship thing when it's actually a leadership thing. So it is a different process, right? And then lastly, the things that dictate how you do. This is what you do. So this is strategy in your church, right? So if your discipleship pathway and your leadership pathway, if those things combined together are your strategy that gets you to your vision, then how do you approach your strategy? Because every church is going to have a vision that's something related to the Great Commission, and the Great Commandment, or the Great Commandment. And then all of us are going to have this sense of a discipleship and a leadership pathway. So what's the difference between one church and another? And it's your core values. Right? And so the core values are how you do what you do to get to where you need to go. Okay, so I just wanted to start there because there's a lot of individuals that talk about vision and mission and strategy and discipleship and this and that and all the other, and I find it's just very complicated. So I wanted to come up with a little bit more of a simpler way to understand what we are talking about. Okay, so what I'd love for you to do is grab a piece of paper if you don't already have one opened up, and I would love for you to write down the first three names that come to mind when I ask you this question. Okay, so I'm going to ask you a question, and I don't want you to overthink the answer. Okay, just immediately, who are the first three people that come to mind when I ask you this question? Okay? All right, you all ready? Okay, who are the three most mature people in your church? Okay, no thinking, just like, don't write your own name. Please, don't write your own name. Like, that's just, and if you came with your boss, don't write their name, because that's just sucking up. But you can write your spouse's name. Who are the three most mature people in your church? Okay, if you don't have at least one name down, you're overthinking it. Okay, just like who popped into your mind? Who is that person? And it could just be one. Now, when you look at this list, why did you write their names down? Right? These are, for the sake of time, these are going to be rhetorical questions, but I just want you to kind of reflect on them. Why did that person come to mind and not someone else? And was there a list of spiritual criteria or characteristics that perhaps caused you to write this person and their name down versus someone else? Like, what is it that caused this person to stand out to you compared to someone else? Sometimes it's the length of time that they've been at our church. We recently had a funeral at our church. Our church is 104 years old today. And we recently had a funeral for the longest standing member of our church. He was 93, and he had been a part of our church for 92 years. Was he the most mature person in our church? Well, man, he was very mature. He was very mature, spiritually deep. The last time, 2 weeks before he passed, my wife and I were at his house. And he was dying. We knew he was dying with cancer. And it was so funny. He knew he was dying. He just sold his car. And we were like, how can we help? And he's like, well, I'm still paying insurance. And I want to try to help. And they sent me an email, but I don't know what to do. And I was like, okay, where's your computer? And there's a honking computer. And I was like, okay, what's your password? And he's like, I don't know what my password is. So I was just sitting there on his living room floor, and I was like trying to help him find his password. Finally found it. I found the email. I got the piece of paper he signed. I took a picture of it. I sent it over. I emailed it through his computer, and he was like, thank you so much. Like, that's what he needed. He just needed someone to take care of his insurance, to cancel it. And then when we prayed for him, he prayed for us, and it was beautiful to hear his prayer for the health and the protection of our staff. And I was like, wow, like of all the things that you would pray for, it's beautiful to see what he was praying for. So why did you write those folks' names down? Is it maybe because of an experience like that? By the end of our time together, and we'll return to this question in a little bit, we have two questions that I'd love for us to answer. Okay? The first question is, what does a disciple look like? And the second one is, how can we disciple better, regardless of our choice of model and study and size? Right? So that's where we're heading today. The first question is, what does a disciple look like? Okay, let's start there. It's interesting how most of us will answer this question, because this question, like, what does a disciple look like? I think most of us, if we haven't sat down and given an extended amount of thinking to it, we typically answer this question in the same way we answer the question, how do you know when you've met the one? Right? You ever have a young adult or a teen or something, or if you think back to like, how do you know when you've met the one? Like, how? Next week will be 19 years that my wife and I will be celebrating. We have 3 kids, an almost 16-year-old, which is frightening because I'm teaching her how to drive. In Alberta, you can get your learners at 14. She didn't, because that's frightening. Just a couple months ago, she got it, but I'm teaching her how to drive. It's frightening, but also really fun. I have a 14-year-old, so 2 girls, and then I have an 11-year-old son. And as a lot of our conversations these days are surrounding boys, especially with my 2 teen girls, there is this question of, how do you know when you've met the one, right? How do most of us answer this question? You just know, right? You just know, right? I mean, some of us will think, okay, you'll just get it eventually, right? No, you don't just get it eventually. You just know. It's a feeling more than anything. And when it comes to discipleship, I feel like that's how most of us see discipleship. How do you know someone's mature? How do you know when someone is on the right path? Well, you just know, right? Like you just, oh, no, but how do you know? Well, I mean, there's like the fruit of the Spirit, or there's that old acronym, which is not a good acronym. Remember? Anyone know what I'm talking about? How do you know? FAT? Anyone know what I'm, right? Faithful, available, teachable. Like it's catchy, but it's not a good acronym. Right? But how do you know? You just, like, what is it? What is it? How do we know? Right? So let's answer it. Let's ask it in a different way. What are the characteristics of a disciple? right? What are the characteristics? So if we're trying to answer this question, what does a disciple look like? Why don't we start here? Okay, what are the characteristics of a disciple? Just shout them out, right? What comes to mind? Pardon me? Humble. Faithful, available, teachable, right? Okay, well, what else? Obedient. Yeah. Servant.
Produces fruit.
Yeah. Produces fruit.
Oh, grace and truth.
Yeah. Grace and truth. What was that?
Replicates.
Replicates. Yeah, I love that. Maybe one more. Patient. Yeah. Give us another 15 minutes, this whole board will be full. But even for those who said and offered a few suggestions, why you said humble over gentle, that actually says something, right? We have the public life, we have a private life, and we have an inner life. And there's this sense where deep underneath, there are ways that we've been discipled or not discipled, things that we have seen in folks that we want to emulate, other things that we've seen in folks that we're like, I don't want to be like you, right? That cause us to come up with a list of characteristics that talk about discipleship. And the fact is there's no universal list that exists. But unless you can articulate, right, very clearly articulate, here is what a disciple looks like, then it's going to be really hard to replicate what you're doing and to teach someone else to do what you're doing, right? Because otherwise they're just going to reproduce what they think, which may not actually fit your culture as a church. Okay, so how many of you are familiar with the transformational discipleship research from Lifeway? Okay, yeah, so about a third of you. Just to give you some background, in 2011, Lifeway Research embarked on their second in-depth study to examine the state of discipleship in the church. If you get Lifeway Research's email, you probably would have just gotten an email talking about the upcoming state of discipleship research that they're about to present. Any of you got that email? No one subscribes to Lifeway Research? Okay, well, they're subscribed to Lifeway. I don't work for them, but they're a great research arm. But anyways, they, in 2011, came out with their second in-depth study. And since then, it's been discipled again. Now it's called, if you want to Google it, it's called the Discipleship Pathway Assessment. But this assessment, just to get you a sense, when we talk about research, anytime anyone says research, please ask some qualifying questions. Because a Twitter survey is not a research, right? There's a difference between something being statistically validated and a survey being conjecture and anecdotal. And there's researchers, and then there's other folks. And what do they say? I love what Stetzer, I used to work with him. I love what he said. He said, statisticians don't lie. No, stats don't lie. It's just the people who use them do. Right? So this research that I'm about to share, there's been 3 in-depth studies that were actually built on Brad Wagner's longitudinal survey of 2,500 Protestants who attended church on a regular basis. So this survey and the results of it, it's now 4 times over that this has been done. And there were 28 expert global interviews with 28 experts globally, a survey of 1,000 Protestant pastors, 4,000 laity, 30% of them from Canada. And this survey's been done over and over and over again. And what I love about this research is it gives us a comprehensive picture as to what a disciple looks like beyond your cultural and geographical location, ethnic and language backgrounds, right? So in a sense, are these 8 characteristics like the be-all and end-all? No, they aren't. But I believe they are a great starting point for us to get a comprehensive picture for what a disciple could look like. Okay, so based on these 2 research projects, here are the 8 characteristics. And I'll quickly unpack them. You don't need to take in-depth notes because you all have the book, No Silver Bullets, and there's a definition for each of them in it. But I just want to give you, just for the sake of our conversation right now, and if you want the slides, yeah.
So this is being videoed in 7 days. This whole lecture will be on the website along with the PowerPoint.
Yeah, perfect. But I'll just give you a quick overview of each of the 8 characteristics, just so that we're using the same language here. Okay, so Bible engagement. This is about studying and engaging the scriptures, reading, memorizing, digging into it. This is about pursuing the truth, seeking wisdom, renewing your mind. Okay, that's Bible engagement. Obeying God and denying self is about laying down your life and picking up the cross. Right? Focusing on God, not on yourself. Focusing on God's will and not your own. Okay? Serving God and others, that's pretty self-explanatory, but when Jesus said, I've come not to be served, but to serve and to give my life as a ransom for many, that's what we're talking about here. Sharing Christ is about intentionally befriending and building relational bridges with non-Christians, and not just being friends with them, but praying for them, looking for opportunity, not forcing, right, but intentionally desiring to share Christ with them, inviting them to church, connections, all of that. Exercising faith. I love what it says in Hebrews 11:6. Without faith, it is impossible to please God, right? So this is about exercising faith, trusting Him, and even trusting when things don't go according to your plan, like my flight's coming here, that God's good, right? That He's good, and that He's still got this. And trusting Him in that, and not living in this constant state of anxiety because you're trying to control your life. Seeking God. This is about living a lifestyle of worship privately and corporately. Building relationships. This is seeking first the kingdom of God and His righteousness. And what I love about righteousness, that word, is it's the word right relatedness, right? So righteousness is about having right relationships with ourselves, with others, with those around us, which I think is a timely word in our polarized and divisive culture today, where most of the time we just block or stop talking, or people just leave our church and don't tell us, right? Which is very painful. And then the last one is being unashamed, and this is transparency. It's about not being ashamed of the gospel of Christ. So do you talk openly in church and community environments about your walk with God? So being unashamed about your faith. Okay, so as you build out your discipleship pathway in your context, you don't have to use this language, but this is a starting point. And what I love about this is too often in ministry, we just reinvent the wheel, right? And then I don't know how many times I've gotten together folks and I've put out a whiteboard and I was like, okay, so let's figure out what does it mean to be a disciple, all right? And in the end, it's like, well, let's start here, okay? And then we can contextualize from there because of how good of a research project this has been. Okay, so we're going to come back to this, but let's now move to the second question. So this is the answer to the first question. What does a disciple look like? Something like this. Now you may be like, but where's this and where's that, and you're missing this and you're missing that. And once again, it's a starting point. But if this is a starting point of what a disciple looks like, then our second question is, how do we disciple better regardless? How do we disciple better, period? But regardless of whatever model and size of church and cultural context that we are in, how do we disciple better? So back to the first question I asked you. Remember the names of the most mature people that you wrote down? Let me ask you a few questions. So I want you to look at those names, think about those folks, and let me ask you a few questions, rhetorical again. But how many of these folks that you wrote down did you personally lead to Christ? 0. Yeah, I think for a lot of people it's going to be 0. How many of them, okay, maybe you didn't personally lead them to Christ, but how many of them did you personally disciple? Correlated question. how many of them were discipled through the ministries of your church? Because here's the thing. If the names on your list weren't won to Christ through you or the ministries of your church, and weren't discipled by you or the ministries of your church, then how do you know that what you're doing is actually working? Now, on the other hand, if all the names that you wrote down were won to Christ and discipled through you or the ministries of your church, then yeah, okay. What you're doing is probably working. But in our day and age of transience and folks way too often switching churches when they haven't actually moved, unfortunately, I think for most churches in North America, the names on our list aren't always from our context. And if that's the case, then the dilemma we have is, do we actually have a surefire and reproducible way to make disciples who make disciples?
Are we allowed to ask questions?
At the end.
Thank you.
Yeah, okay. Because it may be answered along the way. Yeah, but thank you for that. If you have questions, jot them down. We will have a Q&A time.
Over lunch, it's total Q&A. So,
Yeah. Sometimes we get so enamored by our models or by a model of someone that we have looked up to that on paper it's great and it looks great, and right now I'm doing my doctorate in interdisciplinary, it's spiritual formation on one hand and relational neuroscience on another. And there's two ways that humans process information. One is a logical linear way, and the other is a emotional social way. Right? So logical linear is, okay, give me if you're logical linear, you loved those 8 characteristics of disciples. Okay, if you're social emotional in the way that you process, you're like, because you process information differently, not in that way, but in a different way that is more context and right brain to right brain interaction. But here's the thing, right? If the people that you wrote down weren't one to your, if the most mature folks, if those serving in your top leadership positions, if your key staff were not discipled in the context of your church, then I think we need to hold whatever our models are very loosely. I'm not saying to deconstruct it, but let's hold it loosely as we walk through the rest of what we're going to be walking through, because perhaps there's a different way to approach discipleship. Okay, so that's what I wanted to say. I have this funny picture of a monkey because it makes me laugh because it makes me laugh because if we want to be pastors and church leaders who can make disciples, who make disciples, who make disciples, and that's where it starts, right? Because we can't lead churches that make disciples unless we are also making disciples who make disciples who make disciples. Then we need to first look in the mirror. Right? If we want a surefire and reproducible way to make mature disciples in your church in a way that doesn't rely on you, because here's the thing, let's say you answered those questions that I asked you and was like, yeah, I won them to Christ, I discipled them, and you're like, okay, awesome. But I pray and hope that that's not the end. Right? What is that quote from William Vanderbloemen? Every pastor is an interim pastor. Right, I love that. My predecessor, and I'll share this story a little bit later, I took over, he was the lead for 30 years. The church is 104 years old. He wasn't the founder, but he was a legacy guy. But his grandmother came to know Christ at the church. So he was at the church since he was a baby. And I took over from that guy. And I'm still there, thank God, right? There can be stories beyond the scapegoat. It's okay. Succession can go well. But when you, that's funny. They said that's the title of a book. But I do hope that whatever we are doing doesn't center and revolve around us. But what we are doing, we do need to look at ourselves in the mirror and see what sort of example we are providing and giving. So here are a few questions that I want you just to write your initial answers down to. Okay, just your initial answers. You could spend the next hour. In fact, if you have a retreat coming up, if you have a sabbatical coming up, these next questions are great ones to reflect on. But we're not going to have that time for you to give some deep, in-depth thought to this. But I do want to give you a few questions, okay? So the first one is, who do you look up to as a pastor and church leader? Okay, so as I walk through these questions, here's what we're going to do. Because I want to make sure that we get through all of our material. I'm going to be asking some follow-up questions underneath each of these questions. But if someone comes to mind as we're thinking about this first question, just answer it, just write it down, because that's the point of this. I'm not necessarily going to give you any silent time to answer any of these questions, okay? So who do you look up to? Is it, like, when you think about your church practice, your practical theology, who comes to mind? Is it Eugene Peterson, J.I. Packer, Tim Keller? And I'm just gonna, you can just go on and on and on down the list. Who is it that you look up to? And it could be someone you know personally, or someone you admire from a distance. Because the people you look up to have the greatest power to shape you, right? The ones you follow are the ones you model. So who are the pastors, who are the missionaries, who are the theologians, who are the leaders, who are the thinkers that have shaped you most? Question 2, how have those folks shaped you? Okay, so here's the question. Is it maybe the way that you preach? Right? There's just someone that you really look up to and you've listened to countless numbers of their sermons. Is that or is it the way that they lead worship? And you love the way that they do this. Like, how is it that the people you look up to have shaped you? Is it the way that you cast vision? Is it your view on multi-site? Beulah is we're a 104-year-old church. We have 4 campuses. We're starting our next one in the fall next year. And our model of multi-site, there's a lot of inspirations to it. But I have a friend out in Lansing, Michigan, who their church, I love how he put it. He was like, we do multi-site within Lansing, and we do church planting outside of Lansing. And this isn't anything against Life Church or any other church that does multi-site outside of their city. But what I loved about that statement was he was like, because people who live in Grand Rapids don't, like, they're still in Michigan, but Grand Rapids and Holland are very different than Lansing. So we're doing multi-site in Lansing. And what I love about that is in Edmonton, the 1.6 million people who live in greater Edmonton, we can make fun of Calgary all day long. Like this is like making, and I don't know, who does Jacksonville make fun of? Sports-wise. Like, who's your rival? Who's your rival? Hey, there's a lot of rivals. Okay, just give me one. Just get one person. Bob, who's the rival?
Oh, rival to Jackson?
Yeah.
Tennessee.
Tennessee. Okay, the Titans? Okay. I never followed the Titans when I lived in Nashville. But when you think about that rivalry, right? If you're a pastor and your people are Jacksonville, like, you can probably bring up that sport team or bring up that city and it'll give people a chuckle, right? Y'all know what I'm talking about? Like, that's Calgary for Edmonton. So we do multi-site within, but outside of Edmonton, we focus on church planting, right? So that's an example of how our multi-site approach is deeply influenced by one of my friends out in Lansing. Okay, so that's what I'm talking about, how people have shaped you. Third question, what type of leader are you? I love, there's this Chinese general, military strategist, Sun Tzu. He wrote The Art of War. And what I love about this one statement that he makes, you're never going to agree 100% with everything someone says, but one thing that he said that really stuck out to me is, if you know your enemy, you're going to win half the battles, but if you know yourself, you'll win the other half. And that's really stuck with me, because I think in our culture we have this tendency to know our competition, know our enemies, know what the others are doing down the road. I mean, churches down the road should never be an enemy, right? But I think sometimes, we're curious, how did they do? And we kind of keep tabs. They're not our enemies, though. But I think what I'm trying to say is a lot of times we focus more on what others are doing. And I love what Sun Shu said, because he says, that's half. You need to know yourself to win the other half. So that's this question, right? What type of leader are you? Even when it comes to processing information, are you more logical, linear? Are you more social, emotional? Or do you integrate them? Right? Do you like solving problems or finding solutions? If you're familiar with The Working Genius by Patrick Lencioni, that's really popular these days. Where is your genius in the flow of work? Right? So there's so many different assessments out there that can give you a sense of who you are, but a lot of times we focus way more on others rather than ourselves. Okay, so that's that. Question 4, who are the celebrated pastors and leaders in your church and in your region? Okay. A lot of these questions seem super self-reflective, right? And if you're wondering, what in the world does this have to do with how can we disciple better regardless of our church model or size? We're going to get there. Okay, we're going to get there. But these are questions that are actually going to show you what your starting point is, and maybe even also what you think your finishing point is when it comes to discipleship. Okay, so there's a point to all of these, for some of you, very annoying questions, because you're like, stop self-reflecting, just give me information. Who are you? Come on. Okay, no, it's fine. No. But who are the celebrated pastors and leaders in your church and your region? Right? Your church will probably never hand you a Pastor of the Year award. And if they do, that's really weird. That's a weird thing to do. But who is celebrated? Right? Or maybe when you're talking to past congregants, who are they bringing up? Especially if you haven't been there for too long, right? Who is the ideal that they are thinking about? I like calling this pastoral nostalgia. And the problem with pastoral nostalgia is that it's not accurate, right? Because we overemphasize the good and we underemphasize the bad. As time goes by, and there's research around this, as time goes by, all the highs and the lows actually get shaved off, and we focus more on the average of how an experience was. If you want to read more on that, Chip and Dan Heath, The Power of Moments, is a incredible book. And that actually shapes a lot of how we do what we do at Beulah, because we try to create moments and experiences for people to encounter Christ. It's not a Christian book. But the research around it is pretty neat. So who are the celebrated pastors and leaders? What's fascinating is, okay, so I mentioned earlier that I took over from a 30-year guy, and it was a neat process of succession. I was in Nashville. I was working at Lifeway. I was doing consulting with Lifeway, doing a lot of this sort of thing. I was serving as a teaching pastor at our church there too, and we had just gotten our green cards. Okay, so I'm Canadian, but I'm also Korean. And we had just gotten our green cards, which if you're, is anyone here not an American? Okay, 1. Okay, 2. Okay, 3. Okay, so if you're not an American, if you're an American, you may not know how hard it is to get a green card.
This is not an ICE meeting.
No, it's not ICE. Yeah, sorry. Oh my goodness, that is awesome. Show yourself. Okay. Oh man. Okay, but if you're not, if you're an American, you may not know how hard it is and how expensive it is to get a green card. It is incredibly difficult. But after 5 years of living in the US and doing all the rigmarole and everything, we got our green cards. And then God called us back to Canada. And then when I was asked, when I went to the church, I served at Beulah first and then went down to Nashville and served at Lifeway for 5 years. And then I came back to Beulah, where I'm serving as the lead pastor. And when the lead pastor at the time asked me if we'd pray about coming back, in my mind I was like, no. Because in Edmonton, if you have no idea where Edmonton is, if you think where the Rockies are, I'm 3 hours east of the Rockies. Edmonton, Alberta is the it's the northernmost populous city in North America. Okay, 1.6 million people. We don't all live in igloos. But it is winter 6 months out of the year. When it dips below zero, you don't have to drip your faucets. I was surprised in Nashville that you had to drip your faucets. Do you need to drip your faucets around here if it ever dips? Does it ever dip below freezing? Okay, yeah. Okay. Yeah, okay. 6 months of the year, it's winter. Snow comes in October and it doesn't leave until May. Okay. It can get to minus 30 if you're wondering, because I'm talking Celsius. If you're wondering what minus 30 is, it's the same. When it gets to that point, Celsius and Fahrenheit, it's exactly the same thing. So it's really cold. And it'll get there for like 2 weeks at a time, and then it'll go to minus 15, minus 10, and it'll go back. So that's where my previous lead pastor asked, do you want to move back? I was like, what? We live in Nashville. I still say y'all. I mean, this is like, I learned how to barbecue in Nashville. I committed a sin and called barbecue grilling barbecue. And I learned the difference, and I now know how to smoke meat, and I have 2 smokers at home. I love smoking meat. Like, it is, I laughed at people who would smoke for like 12 hours, meat, right? For like 12 hours. It's recorded. For 12 hours a day, and now I'm one of those guys. Like, I love it. Okay? Why would we leave? A Baptist church in Hawaii even reached out and asked if I would be their lead pastor. Right? I was like, yes. We didn't have our green cards at the time, so I had to say no. Right? But I could have. So why would we move back? Why would I move back and follow a guy who has been there since he was a baby, has been there 30 years, who grew the church from like 800 to multi-thousands? Why would I follow a guy like that? Why would I follow someone who is 30 years my senior? I'm a person of color. The church is a Western, in a sense, church, Anglo church. When I started in 2010, it was 90% white. It's about 55, 60% white today. And it's drastically changed. But why would I do that? Well, that's a whole nother story, right? For a different time. And I thank Jesus for how everything happened the way it happened and how things are going. And I praise God that he's still a part of our church. I love Keith Taylor. And if you're wondering why, there's a beautiful book called The Heroes. If you're in that range of succession, there's a really cool book called The Hero's Farewell. And it talks about 4 different archetypes of CEOs that when they're doing succession, who can stay and who can't stay. Like, there's a general, there's an ambassador, there's 4 different archetypes. And if you're an ambassador, you can stay. But if you're not an ambassador, you probably can't stay because you're going to want to take control again. And I love the fact that my predecessor still preaches. I asked him to preach a few times a year. We're actually in the middle of thinking and processing, should we ask him to serve our seniors in an interim fashion because we're in between pastors, right? Great relationship. But it was a lot of work. And I had to face a lot of folks that came to me and was like, you got big shoes to fill. And I'm so grateful that my elders said very directly to me, Daniel, we do not want you to be Keith. We love Keith, but we Like, you are our pastor. We don't want you to be Keith. You are our pastor. And I love the freedom that I have, that even when no one complains anymore. If they complained, they left, right? It's been 4 years now. But I love the fact that the elders and I, that they had my back and we were on the same page. All right, but who are the celebrated pastors and leaders in your region? It's such an important question for you to be aware of. Okay, question 5. What kind of leaders do you have in your church? It's so interesting how the culture of your region and the prime occupation of your region will affect the culture of your church. Okay, I don't know how it is in DC, okay, but in Ottawa, which is Canada's federal capital, churches in Ottawa tend to be very heavy. They seem to be very heavy on wanting to have policies and procedures in place. And it's fascinating. Okay, it makes sense in the region and who works where, whereas I'm in the West. Alberta is like the Texas of Canada. Edmonton is very blue collar. We have policies and procedures, but it's like, let's just go, right? We can do this. And there's that sort of culture there. So what kind of leaders do you have? Because that's going to affect. Do you have folks who are like surgeons? Right? I love this framework. Do you have surgeons? Because surgeons are people who love calling the shots. Or do you have lieutenants who receive their instructions from their commanders and faithfully lead? Say, yeah, I'll do it. Or maybe do you have a culture of union workers who always refer to that policy manual anytime a change is made? Oh, here's a great question. If you think about all the ministries of a church, are the leaders different? Like, are your kids' ministries leaders? I'm not talking about whoever's in charge, but the people underneath them. Are they different than your first impressions folks? Are they different than your worship folks? Right? All of that is super important to identify, because that's these intersection points here between your leadership and your discipleship pathways. Okay? 2 more questions. What happens when the church is challenged or asked to do something? This is very informative of your culture and what you're going to be working with. Here, I'll give you an example. Once again, Beulah is 104 years old today. We've started more than 30 churches since our founding. And what's fascinating is 2 years ago, when our denomination approached us and asked if we would take over this building, it was fascinating because as much as I wanted to say yes, because they knew our multi-site strategy and our desire to continue to launch campuses, and they were like, hey, do you want to take over this building? Because it's just kind of been sitting vacant for a while. This former church building that actually Beulah helped plant, but the church shut down in 2008, and since then it's been kind of serving as a community center and without an owner and all of this. And they're like, would you like to do this? I wanted to say yes, but I was like, no, I mean, that's a big endeavor. And this is 2 years ago. I'd only been lead for 2 years. We had just launched another campus. It seemed like too much for our staff and for our church and all of this. But I was like, okay, let's talk, let's pray. I'll bring it to my elders board. We'll process it. Anyways, in the middle of the week, I got to the church and I saw 2 of our seniors who had been there for probably 40 plus years at our church. And they were just walking the hall. And I went to them and I was like, hey, this isn't public information, but I know you've been a part of Beulah for a really long time. You love our church. And I just want to tell you about this exciting opportunity because I would love your prayer, right? I would love if you would pray for me and our elders. And I'd love if you would pray that God would make it so abundantly clear if we were to take over this building or not for a future campus. And here's what they said. They were like, Daniel, of course, we would love to, but we're going to do it, right? And I was like, well, I mean, I want to do it, but I don't know. And they're like, okay, we'll pray, but we're going to do it, right? Like, are you catching what I'm saying? Like, you see this culture When we want to talk about new campuses or planting churches or giving to missions, the culture of our church is, of course, this is who we are. This is what we do. That's the culture. So when your church is challenged or asked to do something, when Beulah is challenged or asked to multiply, it is an automatic yes. Now, how are we going to do it? But I know that's not the case for every church. Right? So when your church is challenged or asked to do something, when you challenge your church to do an outreach to those in your community, and then those folks start coming into your church, how does your church react? Every Sunday, we have prisoners who are escorted in civilian clothes into our services. We also have prisoners who are escorted into our Thursday night Celebrate Recovery. You would never know that they are in prison, but they are there. And because of our ministry into the prisons. And when I share these stories and the fact that we had 120 people baptized on Easter Sunday, Easter weekend, this past Easter, and one of them was one of those women, prisoners, who she had to cut the line and get to the front. My wife helped her cut the line and get to the front. Otherwise, if she gets back late, they may revoke her privileges to be out of prison. And no one in the church knew that she was a prisoner. I mean, I knew, but no one else knew. And the fact that our church celebrates the fact that we have a ministry like that, I know that took years to develop. But what is celebrated? This gives you a sense around discipleship. And that's that last question, right? What gets celebrated in your church? Okay, so let's go to the next slide. When it comes to discipleship, with all of those questions in mind, right, I want to bring you to this quadrant, okay? Because when it comes to discipleship, there are typically 4 different types of churches, and your answers to the previous questions, and I'm not going to make this answer, the way you answered this question is specifically related to this concept. A lot of that is in chapters 1 and 2 of No Silver Bullets. But the questions that we just asked and reflected on serve as the foundation for this and where you might be and what your defaults might be, okay? But there are, generally speaking, 4 different types of churches out there. And I'll explain the axes first. This first axis is a focus around, when it comes to discipleship and becoming like Christ, are you more directionally focused or destination focused? Do you think that a disciple of Christ ought to look like this and arrive to this particular destination? Just like leaders have competencies and skills, disciples ought to have competencies and skills. And as long as you get to that destination, then you're good, right? That'd be more of a destination mindset. Or that's a little bit more logical, linear. Or if you're more directional, then you're like, yeah, okay, there are these markers, but discipleship to Jesus is actually more directional. I love how Eugene Peterson put it. Discipleship is a long obedience in the same direction, right? Is it more directional in your view or more destination focused? And when it comes to people doing what you ask them to do, that's accountability. Is your church culture low, where everyone kind of does what they want to do, or you say you're going to do something, but whether you actually do it or not, I'm never going to ask you if you actually did it or not? Or is there a high sense of accountability? Because when you put all of these axes together, we have 4 different types of churches that emerge. One is a copycat church, which there's a low sense of accountability and a destination focused. So what they're doing is they're seeing who is winning, whatever their concept and understanding of winning is in church life. They're winning. They're the ones that are celebrated. They're the ones that I look up to. So I'm just going to copy what they did, because if it worked there, it should work here. The problem is they're so low in accountability that they end up copying this church and that church, and they just keep on going from one to another. The difference between the copycat church and the silver bullet church is the silver bullet church is going to really hone in on the silver bullet that this other church has, quote unquote, that is causing them to succeed. They're going to deconstruct it, reconstruct it, focus on it because they did it like this and we're going to do it like that, and that's really going to work. And they're doing all the right systems. That's the accountability side of thing, and the follow-up and the processes and the strategy and the systems to make it work. But in the end, their focus is still destination, right? It's this image of, okay, but this is what discipleship is, right? This is what maturity looks like from a very linear checkbox manner. Versus if you look at a directional and a low accountability church, that's the hippie church. So that's this idea of like, yeah, just do whatever you want to do. Like everything works, right? There's no preaching calendar. There's no diet to what we do. It's just whatever this, however you're inspired and however the Spirit's leading you to, whatever you want to speak about, brother, right? This idea of like just low accountability. It's just because we're on this journey together forever, right? We're just doing this. All right, I don't want to over-characterize. I think I've leaned into it a little bit too much. Okay, but then you got the intentional church, which is high accountability. So there's systems, there's strategies, there's focus areas, there's intentionality, and they realize that discipleship is a long obedience in the same direction. Okay, so practically speaking, and I hope you're kind of getting to my point where the intentional church is where we want to be. Practically speaking, if we want to disciple better and move into that intentional church quadrant, then we need to shift our metric for maturity from outputs to inputs. Okay? So that's what we're going to be talking about now. Next slide. Outputs to inputs. And the way to understand the difference between outputs to inputs. So now what we're doing, if you're trying to figure out on the map, on the roadmap, where are we right now? We talked about what a disciple looks like, and then now we're talking about how do we disciple better. We're now kind of merging those two together. And I want to talk about inputs and outputs. And the way to understand inputs and outputs as it relates to maturity, the best way to understand it is dieting, okay? So if you think about if you want to go on a diet and you're thinking like, okay, I want to do it from an output perspective, okay, just think outputs. Then your diet may look like weighing yourself on a scale because you want to see the output of how much, how heavy you are, what your weight is, and you're weighing yourself on the scale daily, and you're basically going like, oh, well, I ate a burger yesterday, and I thought it was going to make me gain weight, but it actually didn't. So maybe I'll just eat burgers, but I'm going to try salad. Okay, so you ate a salad, and you actually gained weight eating a salad, which you're like, how does that work? Well, because you drenched it in salad dressing, and that's right. So we're like, how did that work? And so an output metric of dieting is you're just doing all these things, these inputs, randomly, and you're hoping that you'll finally find something that'll work. Okay, because your focus is on the output, your weight. An input measure of dieting, I hope you're tracking with me, is counting calories, right? Because you're counting what you're inputting into you. But if all you do is count your calories and you never weigh yourself, you don't actually know, because everyone's base level of caloric intake is different. So how do you actually lose weight? Well, if you're like, it's only eating meat, keto, that's like a silver bullet, right? And if you've ever met someone who's keto, they talk about it like it's a silver bullet and it works for everyone. But the question is, have you ever heard about gout? Because if all you do is eat meat, which is great, because then you get into your metabolism and all this stuff, you may actually have a gout problem later on in life. And there's a reason vegetables are like the toothbrush for our insides. And I'm Korean, and I can't do without rice. So there's no way, right? There's no way I can do a meat-only diet. All right, how do we combine the inputs and the outputs? Well, it's knowing how many calories your body needs to maintain. Right? And that may be 1,500, it may be 2,000, it may be 2,500. It's different for everyone. And the only way you're going to lose weight is knowing what your average caloric intake is to maintain, and then you just need to aim for a deficit. That's how you do it, right? Regardless of what method you use. So if your average caloric intake for your body type and your age and everything is 2,000, then if you intake 1,800 calories over a period of time, you will lose weight. Or if you intake 1,200 calories, which is going to be like hell, right? Because if you're used to 2,000 calories and all you're doing is 1,200 calories, like that's not a lot. Like your body's going to go into, like it's hard. But if you go 1,200 calories when you need 2,000 calories, then you will lose weight faster than if you only go 1,800 calories, right? Like, you know what I'm talking about? So that's what we're talking about here when it comes to discipleship. Can we identify a way to approach discipleship that is inputs and outputs? That's what we're talking about. And that's what I want to show you. Okay? Inputs are the things that you can do today that will result in what you want tomorrow, the outputs that you want tomorrow. Okay, so let's look at these 8 metrics today. These here are not inputs that lead to the output of Christ-likeness and maturity. That's not what these are. These are outputs. These are the collection of what maturity looks like. This is weighing yourself on the scale. This is where you're at today. So then what are the inputs that lead to that? I love what Paul says in 1 Corinthians 3. What then is Apollos? What is Paul? They are servants through whom you believed, and each has the role the Lord has given. I planted, Apollos watered, but God gave the growth. So then neither the one who plants nor the one who waters is anything, but only God who gives the growth. So with this passage in mind, let's go to the next slide. Okay? When it comes to spiritual maturity, what I am not saying is here is the way to grow yourself and your people. Because if that's what I was saying, I would be telling you this is how to be the Holy Spirit. Right? And you and I are not the Holy Spirit, and we can't change anyone. What I'm going to share with you are the seeds and the water. That's what I'm giving you. The inputs, the seeds and the water, that as we focus on planting and watering, okay, in these inputs that I'm going to share with you, when we focus on the planting and the watering, and we entrust this ministry and the people that we are praying for and ministering to and discipling to the Lord, the Holy Spirit is the one who will bring about the growth in their life. But what we're going to stop doing is stop hoping that things work. Or what we're going to stop doing is saying, well, I was discipled like this. So if I was discipled like this and I turned out pretty good, other than my humility, right? Then if it worked for me, it should work for you. But no, that's not the case. Just because it worked for me, it doesn't mean it works for you. Right? We need to be more objective in that way. So what are the inputs that move to the outputs? When I was pastoring in Canada, I came across this research. And these 8 outputs, I mean, this is, like I said, it's been around since 2009, 2011, and it's been repeated over and over and over again. And I fell in love with these 8 metrics when I was working at Beulah, but I had this sinking feeling that doing these 8 things, because I thought these were the inputs that led to the output of maturity, okay? That's what I thought. And then I was like, okay, but if I do these things and I like build the ministry around these things and discipleship around these things, it just feels legalistic. Like I just had this, I'm not really sure, and plus I'm a pastor, so these things don't alliterate. How are you gonna, it's 8, it's not 3, right? Like there's a reason there's a Trinity, not, you know, and they're like, and then what is the acronym anyway? Bosses BB? That's, when I think about Bosses BB, I think about Boss Baby. Right? Like that's what I think about when I think about Boss's BB. And Boss Baby, if you know what I'm talking about, is not a picture of spiritual maturity. So, when I started working for Lifeway in 2014, and Lifeway Research was down the hall, we can go to the next slide. That's kind of distracting. Okay, thank you. Thanks. Who's doing the slides? Thank you. You're awesome. Thank you. When Lifeway Research was down the hall, and they were the brains behind all of this, I told them, here, I'm wrestling with this idea, the inputs, the outputs ideas. I love the research that you came up with and how you've spelt out what it looks like to be a disciple. But I'm trying to, as a pastor, I'm trying to figure out, like, are these outputs, are these inputs, all this stuff? And then they were like, oh, you know what? Yeah, I think we have something that might be what you're talking about. And they had it was from their regression analysis, and they hadn't published this anywhere. So they were like, okay, here you go. And I was like, I don't know how to read. Like, I'm a pastor. I'm not a statistician. Help me understand this. And as we started walking through the regression analysis and trying to find correlations, not causations, right? And there's a big difference. What I'm about to say to you, these aren't causations, right? They're correlations. There's connections. But when they revealed this, and what the research revealed in this regression analysis is essentially that there are inputs for every output. So I'll give you an example. Okay, look at the next slide. Let me ask you a question. Okay, if in your culture at your church there wasn't a lot of evangelism going on, and you wanted to preach a message or disciple your folks to be inspired to evangelize to those they live, work, study, and play with. Okay? So what is that? Sharing Christ. What do you think the input would be that would lead to a greater measure of someone wanting to share Christ? Anyone?
Maybe equipping them
Equipping them?
to do it.
Yeah, because maybe they just don't know how. Yeah, totally. Pardon me?
Praying for them.
Praying for them, yeah.
Helping them understand what Christ did for them.
Helping them understand what Christ did for them, yeah, totally.
Celebrating what happens.
Celebrating what happened,
Testimony of someone who knew Christ.
sharing your testimony, yeah, the testimony of someone who came to Christ.
Doing it ourselves.
Doing it ourselves, yeah, for sure, right? These are all things that I would, all of it makes sense. It makes so much sense. And that's often what we do if we want to inspire people to share Christ. But here's what the research revealed. The more frequently someone confessed their sins, the more likely they were to share their faith. Isn't that cool? Once again, it's not causation, because causation would be like automatic. You confess your sins, all of a sudden you're going to be the greatest evangelist, right? That's causation. No, but there's a high correlation and connection between those who, the more frequently someone confessed their sins, the more likely they were to actually share their faith with someone else. Okay, how many of you have ever preached a sermon on confessing our sins, hoping that there would be evangelism at the end of it all? All right, no, right? But what's interesting about that is it makes a lot of sense, doesn't it? Because if you're confessing your sins, then you are keenly aware for what Christ, John, thank you for what you said, right? You're the closest to the answer, right? Because you're keenly aware. When you're confessing your sins, you are keenly aware for what Christ has done for you and how he has brought us near, how he has brought about transformation, that we are now new creations of Christ. He did that, not me. And the more we do that, then that creates gratitude in our hearts. And then we start, if we're in relationship with our neighbors and others who don't know Christ, we realize that that's not their reality. And you see how that connection can happen. Okay, so for every one of these outputs, there are inputs. And you have the book. In chapter 2, there's a section where I actually lay out the research on what the inputs are for all the outputs. But maybe you're thinking, wait, Daniel, you just said 8 was too many to memorize. And I think in the book there's like 3 to 5 inputs for every output. So you want to see a greater measure of exercising faith in your context? Here are the inputs that are going to lead to that. All of that is in the book, okay? But if you're like, wait, I thought 8 was too many, now you're giving us like 80, right? Okay. The inputs to the outputs specifically are helpful if you are doing small group discipleship or one-to-one discipleship, or you're really connecting with someone on an individual level and they're stuck. You can really tailor, you can target, and you can focus and see some connections and fruit there. That's why that's helpful. Okay, but if you're if you're thinking not pastoring one person, but you're thinking about pastoring dozens of folks, or you're the lead pastor, or you're leading leaders who are leading others, then you can't necessarily do that because everyone's going to be in a different place. Okay, so then what do we do, right? How do we help people? How do we help everyone in our church, whether that's 100 or 500 or 1,000 or whatever that might be? How do we help everyone in our church grow? Are there inputs that actually lead to the growth of all the outputs? You know, in our churches, we have this ridiculous tendency to weigh ourselves on the scale every single week, right? As a church, what I'm talking about is like, how many people showed up? What was the giving like? What is our serving like? We do this. And unfortunately, we either feel good about ourselves or we feel bad about ourselves based on it, unfortunately. But it's something that we often do with the outputs. But imagine what would happen if we actually stopped doing that blindly and we instead focused on the planting and the watering, right? If we just focused on the planting and the watering, wouldn't that be a transformational game changer? So here's what I want to, we have like, what time do we have until? Okay, so in the next 25, 30 minutes we have, I want to get to kind of a system of systems, but what I want to share with you first is when you think about those 8, in No Silver Bullets, and I outlined this in chapter 2 and also in the latter half, there were a few inputs that actually led to an increase in all 8. Right? Because what I mentioned is there's inputs that lead to outputs, but there were actually some inputs that led to all 8 outputs growing up and to the right. Okay, and one of them was Bible reading. Okay, so I'm going to give you the 4, and then we're going to unpack it in a little bit. But the 4 inputs that actually led to all 8 outputs increasing and going up and to the right. Okay, one of them is Bible reading. The other is attendance in worship, serving, and being in a community. Okay? The being in a community, serving, attending frequently, basically, the more often someone did those things, the more likely all 8 outputs were to increase. Okay? And that sort of seems logical, right? The Bible reading was a fascinating one, because it was actually not Bible study and it wasn't Bible memorization. It was literally just reading. The more frequently someone read the Bible, the more likely all 8 outputs were to increase. That's the takeaway. Like serving, attending, all that other stuff is okay. I mean, that's kind of, we want people to serve. We know that as Christ served, he came not to be served, but to serve. We get the importance of community, and in order for us to learn how to love God, we need to love others. If we want to experience God's love, we often experience it through other people. And there's this we get all that stuff, we get that. But the Bible reading one was fascinating. Because it's literally the more frequently someone just read the Bible, the more likely they were to, all 8 outputs were to go up and to the right. And that makes a lot of sense, doesn't it? Because we have the living Word of God. And when someone opens themselves up to the Word of God, then the Spirit of God will transform them. Right? It's the power of the living Word that's sharper than any double-edged sword. But it's not the power of knowledge, it's the power of being with. Right? It's not the power of memorization. And memorization is good, or study, but it's the power of being with and spending time, like Mary did. Being with Jesus. Because he's the one that transforms us, not us. Okay? That's the Bible reading. Okay, so if you think about all that, what I want to end our time together with is by articulating and giving you the starting point for what a discipleship pathway that mixes inputs and outputs and that is directionally focused, what that looks like. And it's a framework. It's not a silver bullet, right? Because that would be ironic. But it's a framework to help you build something unique for your church, okay? And by system, like a discipleship pathway being a system of systems, what I'm talking about is, and maybe you've heard this before, but a system is something that saves yourself serious time, energy, money, and stress, right? So that's what so when I talk about a system, this is what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about a rigid widget making factory machine where there's no flexibility. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm just talking about something that saves yourself serious time, energy, money, and stress because it's replicable and it's something that you don't need to be involved in to happen. Like, that's the dream, isn't it? Like, where you may be over discipleship or over leading, but if you get hit by the bus, we don't want our churches to close and be so reliant on us that everything goes haywire. Like, we actually, as much as maybe our ego would want that to happen, we know that that's not the vision, and that's not what God has called us to. We want to be replaceable. We need to be replaceable. And we don't want everything to rely on us. So what does a discipleship pathway look like? How can you form a discipleship pathway in your church that is a system of systems? Okay? So I found that every church has a discipleship-related system, but not every church has a discipleship pathway. Okay, and here's what I'm talking about. If you are intentional about inviting first-time visitors to an event for newcomers, right? And if you don't do that, it's a great idea. If you do that, that's a discipleship-related system, but that's not a discipleship pathway. Right? Or let's say this, if you regularly offer the Alpha course to create a space for seekers to have a conversation about Jesus and faith and meaning in life, if you do that for newcomers, that also is not a discipleship pathway. It's just a discipleship-related system. Or if you invite people to get into a group or to serve, and you have ways of getting people in, that may seem like a pathway, but that's also a discipleship-related system and not a pathway, right? So any sort of class, any sort of model, any sort of program that you do can be seen as a discipleship-related system, but it's not a pathway. It's only when all of these systems are interconnected and working together that you get a discipleship pathway, which is a system of systems. So take a look at this. Okay, perhaps if any of you have had kids or you have grandkids, maybe you remember these gears. Anyone know, like, this wall of gears? Anyone know, like, where you kind of have to, like, match them together and the dream is, and the goal is to spin one, and if you spin one, everything spins, right? But you have to match them up in shape and size for that to work. Well, think about it like that. Every gear in your church. Is there another slide that looks like gears? Yeah. Okay, awesome. Thank you. So every thing that you do in your church is a discipleship-related system. You see this shape differences? The problem is, a lot of us just kind of say, look, we have a discipleship pathway. Because we do something for newcomers. And we do something for communities, and we do something for serving, and we do something for new to Jesus folks. But this is what a lot of churches look like. But this is not a pathway. A pathway is the next slide, which is the gears fitting together If we can go to, yeah, this is the pathway where you actually have, and there's 3 components to it: first steps, next steps, and ongoing steps. And when these things begin working together, that's when you have a pathway. Okay? So, in No Silver Bullets, you have, all I did was, this was in its very early form, and No Silver Bullets was written in 2017. Well, actually, published in 2017, so I did the research way before that. But in No Silver Bullets, ongoing, first, and next steps are just articulated by a Venn diagram. This is in my newer book that came out last year, the Discipleship Proverb. It's kind of like No Silver Bullets 2.0. And this is how I came to understand the idea of first, next, and ongoing, because they have to integrate together. What I love about this idea and this picture is that if you're a church of 100 people, you still have first steps, next steps, and ongoing steps. You just have fewer first steps, next steps, and ongoing steps because you don't have as many resources and people. But if you're a church of 5,000, you still only have first steps, next steps, and ongoing steps. You just have a lot more gears. Okay, that's the idea of this scalable system. Okay, so let me explain what the difference is. Let's start with the ongoing steps. Ongoing steps are the central. It is the most important thing that you could do as a church, because the ongoing steps, being the central system of your discipleship pathway, ongoing steps are you can think about them like the spiritual practices that you never grow out of. Right? We're talking about direction, not destination. We're talking about inputs, not outputs. So what are the inputs that you never grow out of? What are the things that a follower of Jesus, whether first day as a follower of Jesus or 50th year as a follower of Jesus, you're still doing the same thing? That's what we're talking about. Ongoing steps. It's the core practices of living and being a follower of Jesus. So what are those? Well, a great starting point, this is not prescriptive, but a great starting point would be those inputs that lead to an increase in all the 8 outputs. That would be a great starting point, right? Reading the Bible, serving, community, attendance. But I'm a pastor, so it has to be a little bit more catchy than that and makes more sense. So at our church, we call them gather, grow, give, and go together. And why we call them that is, and we talk about them, at Beulah, we call them the practices. We don't call them spiritual practices, but we call them our practices. So when someone says, what is a disciple? A disciple is someone who gathers, grows, gives, and goes together. We have a definition of what it means to be a disciple, but I'm a little bit more like, okay, but let's go do oriented. So that's the language, those are the banners, that's what we talk about all the time, that a disciple of Jesus is someone who gathers, grows, gives, and goes together. Our metrics as a church, our ministry planning that we do, it's all focused on gathering, growing, giving, and going together. What we measure, our strategic ends, the things that we are accountable to our board of elders, and to our congregation, it's all gather, grow, give, and go. And that's how we've structured it, because we just wanted it to be the thing that we always talk about and that people always hear. Okay, these are our ongoing steps. So gathering, right? That's the attendance. Gathering, growing, giving, and going is broader than those 4 inputs that I talked about, but it encompasses it, right? So gathering together is gathering with one another, either in homes or corporately in worship. Growing together, we have some metrics around, people in groups, but also how are we equipping people to feed themselves? Giving together is what you would think, right? Giving, time, talent, treasures sort of thing. And then the going together is the mission locally, globally. And that's, in a sense, it's not new, right? But we've kind of put it together in that way. So that's the idea of ongoing steps. You never grow out. So whatever you call your ongoing steps, and here's a question that someone's asked: does your church know that there are categories called first, next, and ongoing steps? No, they don't. We never, like, this isn't like, okay, here are our next and our first and our ongoing steps. That's not, we don't talk about it like that. And we don't have no one in the church knows this unless they've read my book, and I don't talk about my book in the church. So most people wouldn't know this, because I think some of us have a tendency to be like, oh, but I want to make that into a diagram and like show it to people and help people understand. It's too complicated. The only thing that we talk about is our ongoing steps, because they are the most important thing. And we know that if everyone in our church family is gathering, growing, giving, and going, we know that these are the seeds and this is the water where the fruit is going to go. So how do we talk about the first and the next steps? Well, we don't call them that. Our first steps, our system of first steps are basically, if you're brand new, what do you do? If you're new to Beulah, what do you do? What are our systems around identifying and following up and connecting differently in all of our ministry areas? What is automated and where's the personal touch? Right? That's the system of first steps. We don't call it that, but we do often say, hey, if you're new here, we would love to, or welcome, and do this, come here, do this. And we're very prescriptive because we live in there's too many decisions that we all need to make. There's decision fatigue in our culture. So when someone has made the decision to come to your church, it wasn't like there's a lot of intentionality, because most people will check you out online first, or your Google reviews, which I hate, but it's a thing. They're going to look you up, right, and then they're going to come. So just tell them, you're new here, come here, right? It's just super simple. And most people will respond to that because they're like, oh, that's me. Okay, sure, I'll do it. The system of next steps is how to help people experience freshness in their walk with Jesus, or to go from being new to learning how to do the ongoing steps. Okay, so think about it like this. Your next steps are on-ramps. They're short-term, temporary initiatives and steps, right? They're sort of like if you're thinking about driving on the interstate. Sometimes if you're driving on the interstate for 3 hours, you just need to get off and go to the restroom or go grab a coffee or do something, right? You got to go for a pit stop. You got to get off the off-ramp, right? That's, in a sense, what your next steps are. In the end, you want everyone in your church on the interstate driving to Jesus. Right? It sounds weird. Okay, but right? But that's sort of, you want people to learn how to drive themselves, feed themselves. Go. You're going. We're going together. We're doing this. But we, in our walk with Jesus and in our everyday life, we need to get off sometimes, because sometimes we've been doing the same thing over and over again. We need new life. We need to be equipped with new tools to learn how to pray, to interact with the scriptures, different classes, events, conferences, prayer meetings, right? These are all examples of next steps. A prayer meeting is a next step because it's short-term and temporary, right? You may have ongoing prayer meetings, but sometimes you may have an extra special prayer meeting that you're going to invite everyone to, right? Beyond that prayer group. That's the idea of the next step. Okay, and there's 3 different categories of next steps, and all of this is in the book, but I just wanted to give it to you here. Discover, deepen, and deploy are the 3 categories of next steps. So discovering is about discovering Jesus. So a course like Alpha would be a great next step, right? I'm brand new to the church. What do? Those are my first steps. Do you bring someone from a first step into the ongoing steps? If they're a mature follower of Christ that has moved to your neighborhood or come, then yeah, that's likely what's going to happen. They're the ones who are like, so how do I get into a group? But if you're new to Jesus, you're not thinking, how do I go into some random stranger's home? Right? Like, they're like, that's weird. Right? So for a lot of people, the first step leads to a next step, which is, hey, come to Alpha. Or come to this seminar, or come to this, how to read your Bible. And then from there, you then do the on-ramps back onto the interstate to learn how to practice the ongoing steps, okay? So discover, deepen, next steps are those ideas of like, okay, how do you dig deep in this? How do you study the scriptures yourself, right? How do you pray? How do you, what does it mean to be a gentle, the gentle presence of Jesus in our hostile culture, right? That would be an interesting deepen sort of seminar, next step. And then a deploy next step is the idea of serving, right? There are so many folks who they will learn how to practice the ongoing steps by serving, by doing a deploy next step. And it's actually by doing a deploy. They will not come to a learning environment, they'll go to a doing environment. So there's so many people like that. So do you have ways to get people from doing, from being deployed, from serving, into, right? Is there an on-ramp from there onto the ongoing steps, right? So do you see this framework, this idea of the first steps, the next steps, and the ongoing steps? And the reason, if you think about that other diagram where all the different discipleship-related systems are different shapes, most of our churches, that's what it is. So to get from there to here, right, you need to learn how to do the on-ramps and the off-ramps on everything. Right? And those are the connection points. So here's something that I recently asked our executive pastor to do with all of our team is I want every ministry to articulate, and this is their first steps, to articulate what is automated and what is personal. We only talked about 2 of the 5 micro shifts in the book. The first one being destination to direction, and the other one being output to input. But there's 3 other ones. There's the whole idea of going from guide, from sage on the stage to being a guide on the side. And there's a lot around there that there's other shift around going from a kind of a maturity mindset to a missionary mindset. And there's these other micro shifts and that are in the book that we didn't talk about. But what's interesting about this one is there's this whole idea of going from being a sage on the stage to being a guide on the side. There's this idea of a high tech and a high touch approach to the way we do leadership development, discipleship ministry, and all of that. And if you're younger, you may lean toward the high tech, right? So you're new, I'm going to automate. All right, I'm going to automate emails. I'm going to automate this. I'm going to automate that. But man, nothing replaces a good old-fashioned phone call, right? That is so powerful today. I still write letters and cards, and I do that often, especially when someone passes away in our congregation, or randomly will encourage our staff through a handwritten card, or I do birthday cards for all of our staff kids, and we send them a little gift, and I do it handwritten because people just don't get snail mail anymore. Right? So what are these high touch that connects with your high tech? Right? Those are layers that you can look at your first steps, your next steps, and your ongoing steps. All right? Okay, so it's 12 o'clock. I know some of you probably have questions, so I think we're going to do lunch and then Q&A, right?
Yep.
Okay.
Okay, is Brian in the room? First, let's give it up for
My question would be this: my folks are older folks for different reasons, and known for a long time. But there are tiers within our church, because there's other people that I can come to mind and say, yeah, I remember Kim.
Yeah.
And Kim's testimony was she came to faith in our church. We've seen her growth. So there may be some things that we can do better, obviously.
Oh, yeah.
But if you tear down, you may be able to say, but there are some things we've done well, correct? I mean, so do we need to be a little more multi-layered in our approach to look at, to evaluate?
Yeah, and that's a great question, and it's very contextual, right?
Yeah.
Because that wouldn't be a question that a church planner would ask, right? Or because how old's your church?
The church is 60 plus years old.
Yeah, right. So then you have we have 5 generations in our church,
Right.
and but what's interesting is when I think about what we are doing today that are creating disciples, making disciples that make disciples that make disciples. It's just that idea of, is what you're doing today working, right? Same with at Beulah. We have so many here's a really cool thing. We have our I think she is now our oldest member because Keith, not my predecessor, but another Keith passed away. But we live streamed our services in the 30s, like through radio, not internet. And because Beulah would reach the homesteads and the farms, the church would print in the newspaper on Saturday night that this was going to be a communion Sunday. So to get your elements ready, because the next day over the radio, we were going to do communion. So we have an individual who she remembers as a kid taking communion over the radio for Beulah. Her kids, she still sits with her kids, and her kids are in their 70s, right? And so there's this generational sense where they're serving, and it's like, okay, so what can we learn from there? So there's some of these folks where they're holding these cultural pieces of who we are, which goes to the sense of like, of course we're going to multiply. Of course we're going to be evangelistic. Of course, anything that's evangelistic or missionary oriented, the church is like, yes, if we don't do it, there's going to be a riot, right? But that's the piece of learning, right? Yeah. So it's definitely not throw baby out with the bathwater. By no means, no. It's just more of a reflective, yeah. Yep. Yeah. And you know what? Any questions, fair game. Because I recognize that there may be questions on the matter of discipleship or from this book or others things, and I recognize that I touched on a variety of things, same with succession and other pieces too. So honestly, this time is to serve you. So any questions that you have? Yep. Yeah, Bradley.
On the TDA research, the 8 outputs that you mentioned, I was just wondering, what are practical ways you found of actually measuring those things in a helpful way so you're not getting overwhelmed? How do you guys measure it?
Yeah, so there is an assessment called the Discipleship Pathway Assessment. And I love Lifeway and I love the research, but we tried for multiple years to actually get as many people in the congregation to do this survey. And to do it actually not just once, but year over year to see the progression and the change in their lives and to own it. Oh, man, the problem is people hate doing surveys. And if it's longer than 5 questions, people just don't want to do it, right? The thing that I don't know if anyone's figured out yet, you know in airports where they have those smiley faces in the washrooms? Is this place clean? Like that kind of thing. And plus I was like, why would you want to touch anything in a washroom? That's smiley. Yeah. Anyways, but that, I think if any of you are very innovative and research focused and you want to help solve this question for the church, I think there needs to be a way to easily get pulse survey sort of responses for folks, or to have a quicker way for people to own and self-measure. Because the problem that we encountered was, it was hard enough to get people to do it once, but we worked really hard and we got a few hundred. We're around 4,000 on a weekend and we only got 300 people to do it after a lot of work. But it was at least we got 300 people to do it. The problem is because we're gonna do it every year. The problem is next year, it was 150. And then the year after it was 60 and we just canned it. And because we were I did it already. Why would I do it again? And it was no, because we want you to see your growth. So there isn't I wish there was, but I haven't figured out a way for people to, there's no tool that exists today on that, to do that.
Yeah, I was trying to figure out what would be helpful.
Yeah, so I think at this point, it's more a matter of my focus has now shifted to how do we spread as many seeds and water as possible. Because I couldn't find a way to accurately measure the 8 on an ongoing way and for people to own that. So a lot of it, so that's why there's so much emphasis around the gather, grow, give, and go, and it's the first, next, ongoing focus. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Yep.
What would be a good strategy? I pastor a Hispanic church, and any ICE member here?
Oh man, that was so funny.
And I got people from every denomination that you can think.
Yeah.
You know, because what's happened
Yeah,
in the
yeah.
last 5 years in our nation. And my wife and I, we're trying to find a strategy to disciple, because one thing always rise up in every meeting, either Sunday school class, a small group, is their denomination background.
Yeah, yeah,
And sometimes can bring conflict
yeah,
within the group. And we're trying to do a discipleship to get into,
yeah.
you know, our way,
Yeah,
and we cannot find always that friction because denomination background.
yeah, 100%. Yeah, are you the senior pastor?
Yes, sir.
There? Yeah, we have a Spanish campus of our 4, and yeah, people from all over all the Latin American countries and different denominations, and you know, charismatic to reform to everything in between, and and that often can sometimes supersede the allegiance to Christ, right? There's a little bit more of a, but this is how we do it. Why aren't we doing it like this? I love what Meldenius said. He said, essentials in the unity, freedom in the, no, sorry, I'm mixing up the quote. In essentials, unity; in non-essentials, charity. And what's the thing? I can't remember it right now. Anyways, there's that sense of like, what is the unifying factor that we are leading people to?
Exactly.
Right? And that's why, for us, it's very much the Word of God and the Spirit of God. Right? And I think when you unpack a culture and create a culture where there's such a deep love for the Word of God, but also an openness to the Spirit of God, what's interesting about that, if you just compare that, because that's, you know, from Genesis to Revelation, right? Word of God and Spirit of God all the way through. But what's interesting about that is humans process information in a similar sort of way, right? There are some humans that process logical linear, right, which is a little bit more on the Word of God side of things. And there are others who are focused more on the social emotional side, which is the Spirit of God, right? So this past weekend, we're working through James in the summer. I created this self-assessment for our church to answer these 10 questions in the middle of the message. And I just did it one after another, and I had a Likert scale, and it was, I just did this thing because I wanted people to see and look at themselves in the mirror. Right? James talks a lot about, you know, look at yourself in the mirror and all that stuff. So I did that, and it was very much of a self-reflective side. And then at the end of the message, I did a Lectio Divina on where it was a reflective scripture reading. And then I asked, well, what is Jesus saying to you right now? Right? The Spirit of God side of things. And it's interesting, when your focus is Christ and your focus is the Word and the Spirit, how sometimes some of those denominational pieces start fading away, because it's not actually saying we're not going to talk about that. It's more of a, we're going to talk about the Word and the Spirit more. Right? So hopefully something in that was, yeah. Yeah,
Is
Chris.
most of your discipleship pathway, is it staff-driven, top-down program, or is it indigenous, bottom-up, rising up? How do you mesh those two together?
Yeah, because of the scale and the size of our context, a lot of our ministries and initiatives are staff-driven. Because our staff are planning a year out, and there's an approval process, and there's all that side of things. But within each of the ministry areas, there's a lot of freedom and collaboration that happens. So what ends up happening is we have our vision, and every year before our staff begins planning what the ministry looks like, we will share what the thematic emphasis and the thematic goal is. Or maybe some of you are familiar like with the WIG sort of language or the BHAG sort of language. So what is that main lens in which we're looking at our vision? And then, so as the senior pastor, you know, I'm leading that process, and then I give that to our executive pastor and the rest of our ministry staff. And they're now taking the vision and our thematic goal And they are creating all the different ministry plans that come in line with that. Which for some of them, it's if they have a big team, it's them. But a lot of them, it's like, oh, the person who leads our marriage ministry is a volunteer. The person who leads our prison side of things, volunteer. So there's all these volunteers within, but they're always doing it within the frame of the thematic goal, which gets to the vision. And then we found that by actually doing it that way, I told my staff, I was like, hey guys, do you realize that I don't actually know everything that's being planned here? And we've actually structured it that way because we want you and your leaders to create ministry together. But it's not whatever you want, right? It's within the thematic frame for that year. Yep. Yep, John.
What are some practical steps you would take to figure out how tangled your ball of yarn is?
So what are practical steps you can take to figure out how tangled your ball of yarn is? And are you referring to the image in the book? Yeah. And are you talking about more like the ball of yarn that the church is in? Or
like the specific individual, like just piecing together everything you've learned throughout the years and figuring out how you can relate that to other people.
Yeah. So there's this image in the book that talks about this ball of yarn of all the things that we have learned, right? So there's this sense of, even if you think about the 8 questions that we walked through, some of you probably had a really easy time answering those questions, and others of you couldn't. You just kept on hitting a wall. And I think some of that comes to the notion of like, how self-aware are you? And how much internal work have you done, right? So I think that's the question of if you think about this idea of we have a public life, an inner life, and then we have even a subconscious layer underneath, being that private life. How aware are you of the things that affect you, right? So for example, one thing that I've been doing for the last 4 years is I see a therapist personally. And I'm seeing a therapist on a monthly basis because when COVID hit, and then when one of our pastors passed away, and then when my dad died from cancer a week after I became the lead pastor, and there was just loss after loss after loss after loss, and so much chaos going on in the church and all that. I was like, I need help. So I started seeing my therapist, who helped actually unpack a lot of trauma in my past. And there's 2 different types of trauma. There's big T traumas, which is like you went to war and saw people killed, or there's like big, or you saw someone die in front of you, or some like huge tragedy. And then there's the little T traumas of your dad wasn't around for you every time you needed him, or or these pieces of, hey, there's been a lot of people that have left your church, and they're refusing to tell you why, right? And a lot of these little T traumas that actually come together, and the cumulative effect can actually be equal to or bigger than the effect of big T trauma in your life. So there is a sense where, for me, and I think it's the whole untangling side of things, it's like it's that Sun Tzu quote, right? Like, how aware are you of yourself? So, no, cool.
You had given on the next steps gears, 3 different ones. I'm a little fuzzy on the deploy.
Oh yeah, okay.
Do you mind just kind of expanding a little bit on the deploy next steps, so I can have maybe a greater understanding?
Yeah. So that idea of deploy next steps, there's this idea of a tiered pathway to someone living a lifestyle of service. So we live in such a consumeristic culture. So how do you get someone to the point of living like Christ when it comes to service, right? Like, how do you get someone who naturally, automatically wants to serve those they live, work, study, and play with? and give of themselves in that way. Well, the way to train, it's not by just saying, hey, Jesus did it, so you should do it, right? Because our consumeristic, it's the ball of yarn, right? Like this consumeristic, hyper-individualistic side of us just gets in the way. So the idea of the deploy next steps would be level 1 would be a one-off service project, right? And it would just be this sense of, hey, we're going to go give away cold bottle of waters because there's a heat wave coming, right? Just super easy, one-off. And then from that, you then tier up to then saying, okay, we're going to do regular service, and then we're going to incorporate and have a lifestyle of service. But there is this sense where and a lot of churches do it. Some churches actually will shut down on Sunday and do like a love your city sort of day, service sort of day, right? And that's a great way to give people a taste of serving. It's the whole thing with missions, short-term missions. Some people hate short-term missions because of how consumeristic they can be, right? Is it a vacation or is it a short-term missions, right? But the thing is, in our hyper-individualistic, consumeristic society where people love traveling, if you organize a mission trip to a really awesome destination sort of place, sure, you might get some people who are like, oh, cool, we're going to go vacation, I'm going to go see that place. But the fact is, they're choosing to go with you and not spend that money on a cruise or something else because they want purpose with their vacation. And if you know anything about short-term mission trips, they're way more impactful on the people going than the people receiving. In fact, a lot of long-term missionaries, it's a headache to organize short-term mission trips, right? Anyone know it, right? Yeah. But there's so much transformation that happens for the people going, right? And that's that whole piece of like, how do you continue to create next steps like that? Where it's like, yeah, we're going to go serve at the homeless mission. Do I ultimately want people to serve those that they live, work, study, and play with more than those downtown in the mission? Of course, like that's the goal, right? But sometimes we need to help people build up to that and learn how to, and that's that idea of the deploy next steps.
Perfect, thank you.
Yeah, cool, awesome. Anything else?
I don't have a specific question.
Yeah.
I do, it doesn't require much of an answer.
Yeah.
You listed off a number of questions. How do you look up to, or who do you look up to as a pastor or church leader? How do you shape, how others shape you? What types of leader are you? All of those.
Mm-hmm. Chapter 1. Chapter 1.
I'm blind. Combing.
No, that's okay. Yeah.
That's all.
Yeah. Awesome. Any last questions? You're all probably thinking, I have so many emails.
This was kind of silly, but are you going to do the narration for the audiobook version of your most recent book? If you have not.
Oh, yeah, I did. There is already an Audible for it. Yeah. Yeah, it's fun to do. Audiobooks are fun. Yeah. Yep, cool. Thank you, everyone.
All right, let's give it up for me.